Problem Solved is sponsored by NYC Best Property Management. NYC Best Property Management partners with co-op, condo, and community association boards, developers, and high-rise property owners to provide expert guidance on operational decisions and budget strategies, ensuring efficient and effective property management. At NYC Best Property Management, we go beyond just managing properties. We focus on creating a place where you truly feel at home. Together, we make living easy and enjoyable. Contact info at nycmgt.com to learn what NYC Best Property Management can do for you.
Welcome to Problem Solved, a conversation about challenges facing New York co-op and condo board directors. I'm Carol Ott with Habitat Magazine, and I'm joined today by Michael Wolfe, president of Wolfe Realty Services, a consulting and advisory firm. Michael, thanks so much for being here.
Thank you, Carol. Look forward to speaking with you this morning.
Building maintenance is an ongoing concern and headache for co-op and condo board directors, but it's a task that ultimately supports the value of everyone's apartment. At a surface level, it sounds like a simple decision-making process. Get the funds, hire an engineer or architect, get some bids from a contractor, and do the work. Michael, you worked with a building that had a terracotta cornice that was in bad shape, and the fix sounds simple, but it wasn't. What did the board do and what was it facing?
Well, the board was facing a cornice replacement due to cracked terracotta that was certainly beyond its useful life and certainly needed replacements. And there were certain sections of it that needed this work, as well as other components of the building as well as part of their FISP project. And unfortunately, boards sometimes take specifications or recommendations verbatim. And perhaps there are other options, with any project that you do. And in this particular case, the cost of the mobilization, we added pipe scaffolding to this building, as well as removing the segments of the terracotta, were extremely costly. Now, it's important to note that I was brought in after the initial specification phase, after the initial planning phase. And what I suggested to the board was, in lieu of replacing sections of the terracotta, why don't you replace the entire cornice with something like glass reinforced concrete? And they hadn't had this option before. There was a landmarks filing needed to be done. And initially, landmark said, you have to replace it with terracotta, which is there now. The problem this building would have faced was 5 years from now, during the next FISP cycle or the cycle thereafter, there was no doubt that terracotta in a 100-year-old building with freeze-thaw cycles in the city would certainly need more repair, replacement, modifications. The mobilization costs, the filing fees for these jobs today, in some cases dwarfs cost of the work that they're doing. So I had suggested that in lieu of replacing components, just replace the entire cornice with a like material that'll give you the visual aspect that will please landmarks and really safeguard the building from addressing this for cycles to come. So I used some of the resources that I've had in the industry, and I went to the Department of Buildings and I went to Landmarks in concert with the architect in this particular building. And we had Landmarks and the Department of Buildings approve the replacement of the entire cornice. This was a victory. The cost of replacing the entire cornice as opposed to segments was almost equal in price. But more importantly, it will not have the building incur the mobilization costs in the next cycle or for many, many cycles that they would have incurred if they just replaced aspects of the terracotta.
So let me just jump in here. When you say the cost of the replacement was basically, forgetting the mobilization, was basically the same, is that because the terracotta material was not going to be actual terracotta, but it was going to be something that looks like terracotta?
Correct. It's a glass reinforced product, fiberglass reinforced, and it doesn't have the same adverse effects that weather causes to terracotta. And look, by no means am I poo-pooing terracotta, right? It's wonderful. It's what the city is built on, but it's just not practical in every case as a replacement, especially a cornice, something that's very difficult to get to. It's the entire upper portion of the building. And look, the reason why landmarks is strict, right? We want buildings to look the way they did when they were built. We want it to feel the same. We want it to look the same, color. But a cornice that you look from the street, no one could tell that it's one material versus the other, right? We're going to match color. We're going to match appearance. It's really a great replacement. Landmarks has a prohibition against anything below the 6th floor not being replaced with terracotta, but above the 6th floor, you actually can with a filing. So that's the standard today. Not only that, terracotta is taking 9 to 12 months to get replacement parts. By the time the molds are done, by the time it's shipped to 2 places in the United States, either upstate New York or the West Coast, the time constraints to get your product back, just think about that and the inconvenience for residents, having pipe or scaffolding or mobilization to the building, the sidewalk shed rental that you're paying for. So all these components are really difficult to absorb. And to your immediate question, Carol, the cost of the full replacement was equal, let's call it equal, very close to what the segment replacement was. And now I know the next cycle I'm not replacing it again.
And give me a sense, if you can, of the actual dollars for the cornice replacement and the mobilization. I'm curious what the mobilization, the real dollars were.
Well, the cost of the cornice was close to $750,000, and the replacement segments were close to $750,000. But the mobilization, the sidewalk shed, in this case, they used supported scaffold, which is pipe scaffold up the building. So now we have pipe scaffolding, netting around the whole building. And I just want to emphasize that there was other work on the building as well. It wasn't just for the cornice, but it's easier to replace certain aspects of a cornice, depending on the material it is, via supported scaffold versus conventional outrigger or hanging scaffold due to weight. So if this was a limestone cornice, which it wasn't, you'd probably have to put in supported scaffold due to the weight. But since it was terracotta, you probably could mobilize it with suspended scaffold and outriggers, but hundreds of thousands of dollars between the sidewalk shed and the scaffolding. So if we fast forward 5 years from now and the building remained clean, because this is being filed as a clean building, that the cost of the sidewalk shed and the scaffolding aspect alone, just to get to certain segments, if we had to redo this job again, was probably in the $300,000 to $400,000 range.
So in total, could you just remind me, perhaps you already said, what was the building's expense for the mobilization and and the cornice?
It was about $1.2 million.
And did they have the funds?
They had some of the funds. So in this particular case, they had some reserve fund, they had some line of credit, and they also had an assessment. So those were the buckets they were choosing from. They weren't going to refinance the mortgage due to the high interest rates that we're facing right now. So they did partial reserve in this case and partial assessment. And the assessment was broken down for people that wanted to pay immediately or could pay over a number of years, but incurring the interest charge that the building would face as well for the extra borrowing.
And that's the interest charge that they're facing on their line of credit.
Correct.
And if you had to put together a financial package with reserves, assessments, and line of credit, it's a sort of like a moving part, and they still had to pay their bills. That's the part that the assessment may not be completed for whatever their time period was, several years, but the bills probably had to come due, by the end of the project. How do you manage those three components? How do you orchestrate that?
Well, when you're planning a job, you certainly have a days of work that's in the contract. And then when you're preparing the budget for a job, usually know how long it's going to take. Now, there's nothing wrong with a building dipping below their comfortable threshold of a reserve fund temporarily. So if a building wanted to have $500,000 in their reserve fund, I guess obviously a hypothetical, in perpetuity, and that dipped down to $200,000 for a year or so, it's not tragic, right? It's all in the planning. And I think where boards at times, miss proper planning is either lack of guidance, lack of information, just really what do they want to accomplish? So certainly in a building, infrastructure should trump everything else. We can't have leaks, we can't have violations. We got to make sure that the envelope for our building's in very good shape. And then we could kind of put to the side redoing hallways and lobby restorations, although it doesn't mean we forget about them. So it's really about how the board plans for the future. What do we want to be when we grow up? What do we want to do? And can a building sustain multiple projects simultaneously? And also, what is the makeup of the building with respect to how much could they endure with respect to assessments and higher costs? And this is putting climate mobilization to the side for a moment.
So what a board is actually doing is they're leveraging their reserve fund and their line of credit to be able to really offer assessments?
Well, offer assessments that are of long duration of time,
Right.
right? There are buildings that won't go over 1 year assessment. There are buildings that'll go probably up to 3. I think anything more than that is I won't say dangerous, but problematic, because something's always on the horizon and there's planning. And you don't want to be known as a building that has constant assessments. You're better off doing a larger one with planning and contingency. And I think when I use the word contingency, that's such an important word for boards to take away from this, because you want things to go according to plan, but a lot of times they don't, especially in these BIS projects. How much did you spend out of the gate? How much did you spend on the planning of the project? And I think that boards that do not spend the proper amount initially spend more money down the road. And the reason for that is when you have a specification for a job that's all encompassing or close to it, you get much better pricing in the industry. It's the change orders and the unit prices that drive costs up unnecessarily because you didn't spend a little more money out of the gate. Now, not every building has to, but you have to know what happened in the past, what your building is made of. Are you a white glazed brick building? Do you have a lot of terracotta? Were you very prudent in past cycles? How did you take care of your building for the last 10, 15 years?
What are the most common mistakes that you see that boards make when confronted with these projects?
Well, especially on FISP, but tends to be the most expensive job they have with a lot of unknowns, is not spending enough money on the initial phase of discovery. It doesn't mean you need to drop every foot, right? We have to do 60 foot. I'm being facetious on every foot. But if something's suspect, do we do probes now to identify steel issues as opposed to getting up on a rig, opening up brick after the job has been assessed and planned? Then all of a sudden we have a $500,000 change order or a balcony or a balconette that's problematic. So spend a little extra money on the probing and discovery phase. So now that the specification I have going out is really close to complete. And I think that's where boards make a mistake, where they're looking for the least expensive professional or the least expensive mobilization initially. And I think spending more money with the right professional initially will save you money down the road, pay dividends actually.
And when you say the right professional, I mean, there are a group of professionals that tend to work in this industry. Is it really up to the board to say, I need everything from A to Z? For instance, with our facade. So if you need to do a probe, I'm going to pay for the probe. Is it the board that really has to give the professional a direction?
You would hope not. So the managing agent, if you are not self-managed, and the professional you hire should make that available to the board. Now, one size doesn't fit all. It doesn't mean that every building should go full out and spend $1 gazillion on mobilization and exploratory exercise in the building, but at least they should know they have the option to do it, right? Why? The board should be informed. Here is what our recommendation is. Here are the options. If you do this, this is where I think you'll end up. If you don't do this, here's where I think you'll end up. Not every building's in disrepair. Not every building has the same makeup. So it's not one size fits all. In many cases, complying with the law and doing the necessary drops is fine. It's really about what they find when they do those drops. Are we doing it through binoculars? Are we using a boom truck? There's also something called rope access that is fantastic for a lot of buildings, where professionals actually rappel off a building without a lot of equipment on a roof, disrupting shareholder terraces, public terraces. And now you're up close on every aspect of the building as well. So it depends on the construction, location. Do you have a lot of setbacks? So this is what gets me excited, is providing these options for boards about being informed, right? The key is here is to let everyone know what the different scenarios and results of those scenarios will be.
All right. That is a terrific takeaway for boards. Thank you very much, Michael. Michael Wolfe, president of Wolfe Realty Services.
Thank you, Carol.
Navigating New York City's complex real estate landscape demands deep expertise, especially for co-op and condo boards, owners, and industry-related businesses striving to balance compliance, community well-being, and financial health. For over 40 years, Wolfe Realty Services has been a trusted advisor delivering strategic, personalized solutions that empower boards and businesses to lead with confidence. Visit wolferealtyservices.com to discover how we can support your success so you can focus on your community or business, not just the bottom line.